the target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. TC, this is Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, MBRR Pod. This is another episode of Libertarian LowDown. You guys are going to be super stoked to have my guest on here in just a minute. The ultimately valuable Scott Horton, and I think he's at somewhere like 250 million episodes in interviews that he's either conducted or been part of now, and we are going to be talking to him about his new. I don't want to call it a book because I think book would sell it short. I think it might be the magnus opus of all things anti-war. I've seen the book, and if you've been paying any attention, you've probably seen it as well. I think it's something about like this thick. It actually weighs more than my Hyundai. I don't think I could actually put a copy of it in the trunk of my Hyundai and make it home without popping wheelies all the way. But it is a phenomenal book. From what I'm hearing from everyone, I haven't had a chance to read it yet myself, but we're going to be working on that, probably mostly through audio. And I know Scott's been working on doing some audio, but we'll get to that. Before we get rolling too far, I just want to go through all of the real quick ancillary things that are important at the front end of the show. I want to thank the Angry Vet for being a show producer and IMAV for being a show producer. If you guys haven't followed Tav and his story about what he's got going on with the VA and what they're trying to do to him and the fight that he's had to get any kind of actual decent care and any kind of justice over what they did to him for recording his own appointments, you're in for a treat to listen to his story from the VA to the local law enforcement there. So go over and check out the Angry Vet on YouTube, and also thanks to an anonymous show producer who has really stepped up to help the channel as well. I can't thank you guys enough for what you're doing. And for those of you that don't know or maybe haven't heard, Mrs. Minnesota, Mrs. TC, did have a heart attack a couple of weeks ago. She is in recovery. She's at home. She's not back to work yet. Some friends of the show, the Wilburns, and Mike Arthur, Skipper from the Veteran Nation podcast that I co-host, they got together and said, hey, let's do something. So they launched a GiveSendGo, and you can find that in the description of this video along with all of Scott's links. So if you have some time on your hands and you want to throw some positive thoughts, prayers, or whatever, or can help out with the GiveSendGo to help us recoup some of her lost wages, we would be forever and eternally grateful for that. So you guys know I'm a vet. War issues, American interventionism, and American imperialism are really big to me. I'm tired of seeing American soldiers get sent off to hot spots all over the world to advance the military-industrial complex causes and the illegal banker wars and the neocons' desire to spread democracy at all costs, especially as long as it's costing you your money and the lives of your sons and now daughters. You know how important those topics are to me, which is why I have gotten involved here in Minnesota with Defend the Guard and Bring Our Troops Home, which is where I actually got to meet Scott for the very first time face-to-face, was at the rally 2 years ago here in Minnesota. And the conversation we're going to have today is incredibly important because, as you guys know, many of you know, if you're paying attention to anything I've been talking about, there has been a new order for deployment of troops from an armored division to Poland. And if you don't know anything about Poland, Poland is right there on the front line. And if we don't get this situation, we the people don't get this situation under control as much as we can, we are on the cusp of World War III. And it's not because Russia is just some rogue nation that's out of control. It's because we have, as the title so apropos says of Scott's book, we have provoked them. And it has been a long provocation in the making. So we are going to bring Scott in, and he is going to tell us about his work and research. Scott, thank you so much for making time to do this, to come on and talk to my audience about the work you did. I know you weren't doing shows and stuff other than your own stuff for a while because you were really digging into this. So tell us a little bit about what made you decide to tackle the project.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, TC. It's great to be back with you here. And hi to everybody. I'm wearing a t-shirt because it's Saturday. I'm wearing
a sweatshirt because it's Saturday in Minnesota. So
oh, there you go. Well,
in November.
It's so nice outside. I think I might take the boat out as soon as this interview's over. But listen, why did I write it? Well, look, I've been at antiwar.com for 20 years. I was anti-government and interested enough in reading all about it from the time I was still in high school, really. So I guess I have somewhat of a comparative advantage, if only in the sense of just being around doing the same job for a very long time in a row. And that means keeping an eye on American imperial expansion in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, as well as in Asia. Although I'm not nearly as good on the Pacific issues as the others. Obviously, I spent 20 years covering the terror wars in the Middle East. And so I decided I'd write my book Enough Already about the terror wars. And that, I guess what I decided there was my comparative advantage that made sense for me to write the book was that I could tell you a bit about each and every one of the wars. And I think pretty sure I can tell you how each one led to the next. And how all the different bad policies led to the next bad policies and all the blowback and consequences and all of that. I think a lot of times, academics, they have to be too professional and therefore nice to their subjects and not, you know what I mean? Like, this seems like it could have been disingenuous, right? Like, that's as hardcore as they could ever be because that's the way that they write. And then a lot of people who are more like popular political authors, they're partisans. So they want to pull all their punches against one side and blame everything on the other. Whereas I'm a libertarian and not a real expert from the East Coast, right? I'm not a member of any, the foreign policy establishment itself at all. I'm like sitting
You're
here.
You're not secretly in the CFR or anything like that.
Yeah, no. I'm sitting here shooting spitballs from Texas, right? So I don't have any interest in doing anything but roast them all. You know what I mean? I don't have, I have no incentive to pull my punch against any of them. And I'm happy to explain to everyone that the two that I personally just hate the most are Bill Clinton and W. Bush. So you can see how it's not a partisan thing. It's just the childish chip on my shoulder against those two guys and the particular sins that they committed. Not that makes me...
Which ultimately kind of leads to, like you were saying, all these tie-ins over the last, how many, like almost 30 years now, of war after war after war has led us to where we are now.
And that's so the same thing in Europe, right? It's the same thing in Europe. Absolutely. It's the same people in question, right? It's Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama mostly are the ones making these decisions. I mean, when Trump was the president, and look, I'm not a diehard Trump guy, but it's just true that he was barely in control of his own government, certainly on foreign policy and especially on Russian policy. And also he went ahead and went along with them when he had, he thought he had run out of choices, and, he escalated weapon sales and other things. Even though that was contrary to what he mostly wanted to do. I often cite this quote from the New York Times Magazine where someone in his own government said that, well, the president's like the captain of a ship. He's got his hands on the wheel, but it's not connected to anything. There's somebody else steering down below, as Vindman called it, the interagency, just meaning the secret police, right? Like the permanent government that has no name, no face, no accountability, that can impeach a president if he crosses them, even though they simply work for him.
Now everybody knows it as the deep state, but I mean, it's been, it's been there probably longer than anybody really wants to acknowledge or recognize.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about that. So when one becomes a libertarian and starts studying foreign policy, well, starts questioning World War I. That's a big one for people. Sometimes then you get to the Civil War. Oh man, maybe Abraham Lincoln wasn't the saint.
The hero.
Yeah. And or at least maybe like there's a lot of gray areas and double-edged swords in that one and these kinds of things, much murkier than they taught you in school at the very least. And then you get to World War II and you're like, well, okay, our enemies were still pure evil. I mean, my great uncle was tortured by the Japanese in that thing, right? I'm still on board for our enemies were pure evil in that one. On the other hand, our leaders were FDR and his men, and they deliberately turned a blind eye at Pearl Harbor and allowed us to be attacked to get us into the war in Europe. That's just true. So damn him too.
And there was even a little provocation there.
I'm sorry?
There was even a little provocation there with, we're not going to get involved, but we're going to sanction the crap out of you and not let you, buy oil and whatnot. Like,
well, and even worse, shipping Air Force planes to the Chinese to use against them in the war.
Yeah.
Right. And helping China for years in the, from that side. So we're already very involved in the war. Absolutely. And, they always give us kind of the short shrift kind of history of that. Then as libertarians, we're kind of right wingers. We're definitely capitalists and hardcore anti-communists. That doesn't necessarily mean we're cold warriors. That means we hate the Soviet Union. Whether we want to do anything about it or not, maybe we'll argue like what we're going to do. But we sure ain't fans of Soviet communism. And so then you have kind of a split on just how much containing should be done, how much adventurism should be done in the name of anti-communism over the world. And the libertarians split from the right over Vietnam on this in the early 1970s at the Young Americans for Freedom. This was a defining split. The libertarians said, we are not going to support this, even with the Reds as the enemy. So in other words, this is like the libertarian introduction to war revisionism, right? Like you got to start questioning all of these things where even you get to the point where you start questioning World War II, but then, and then the Cold War. And then here's what happened. You had a lot of conservatives who, when the Cold War ended, they said, okay, great. They were old enough to remember all the promises that this was a temporary emergency. And that was why we had built this world empire, was because of global communism. It was even just the Russian Empire. Well, that sounds like the British and the French problem or something. But this is Soviet communism under Joseph Stalin. They're trying to overthrow the whole world and enslave us all and torture us in their torture prisons. So no, we're going to contain that. We're going to roll that back. And that was obviously embellished. The expansionist ability, at least, I don't know about the tendency, the expansionism of the Soviet Union was embellished. But their pure evil at home was not. Their totalitarianism and their mass murder was not embellished. It was true. And so there were plenty of people who were even, Reaganites, hardcore Cold Warrior anti-communists, who as soon as the Cold War ended, they said, okay, let's abandon the empire and come home.
Because we thought it was all about stopping communist Russia.
The temporary emergency is over. That's right. The temporary emergency, it lasted 50 years. It lasted way longer than we wish, 45, whatever. We wish it hadn't lasted so long, but it's finally over. So this is people like Pat Buchanan, who was Ronald Reagan's speechwriter, had been Nixon's speechwriter, ardent Cold Warrior. And people like him, people like Jude Wanniski and Scott McConnell and a lot of others. And of course, Ron Paul, the great Ron Paul, who had already given up on the Cold War long before that. But then they didn't come home. And there's a guy named Chalmers Johnson, wrote a great book called Blowback, and then Sorrows of Empire and Nemesis, The Last Days of the American Republic. And he was a right-wing Cold Warrior, a professor at USC, and a contract analyst for the CIA who would often write their morning daily brief kind of thing, or many times did. So he was a right-winger, CIA analyst, hardcore American patriot, hardcore anti-communist, bolsterer of the Cold War, spent decades lecturing students about why we have to do this. And then the Soviet Union ceased to exist, and the American empire didn't. And Chalmers Johnson was man enough to say, wait a minute now. Is this just now that I disagree with the policy the way it is now? Or am I a sucker? And I was actually supporting something that wasn't so defensive in the end. Because look at its momentum as it just continues on without a second thought, Yeah,
so and I think that's where a lot of people they hear that, tear down that wall speech from Reagan, and then we eventually see the wall fall. and we start to see Russia kind of shrink, back as it gives up all these satellite countries back to, and Ukraine, I know, is a big one. We'll get to that here shortly. And they kind of forget history, and they even forget contemporary events, and they think that NATO in particular remains in this defensive posture at its own borders. And what we talked about, I think, the first time that you were on, because we did a little bit of a deep dive into the history of the Maidan and all of that, but people don't realize that NATO did not stop. They were like, oh no, yeah, you keep shrinking, we're going to keep growing. And we started to push into places like Poland and Moldova, and it never ended. And I've heard you and others, but you in particular, you beat this because no one's paying attention to the dead horse. It's like they're not paying attention. Like, no, we promised no expansion while we continue to expand, which was exactly what we were supposedly fighting during the Cold War, was their expansionism. And we continue to see people still view Russia as the Soviet Union. It is still the great evil. And and being in that Gen X generation, I grew up with the boomers beating that into my mind and in my head. I grew up 50 miles from Offutt Air Force Base. It was always the Russians are going to bomb us. They're going to nuke us into oblivion. And it took me a really long time. Actually, it took me basically discovering you and others to go, are they still a threat? Because we treat them like they are. And
I mean, look, it's the kind of thing where, and I'm getting a lot of this lately from the war party arguing that, like, no, see, Russia's the bully. We should have just beat him up earlier. We should have given the war guarantee to Ukraine earlier. We should have just promised the whole world that if Russia ever messes with them, then we'll come and protect them. And otherwise, Russia's going to come for the whole world. So it's, it's not falsifiable, right? It's just a counterfactual kind of thing. I would argue that if America had truly offered NATO membership to Ukraine earlier, then Russia would have just invaded before the ink was dry on the document. If they, before the ceremony where they actually signed the thing, they would have invaded then. Maybe dropped a nuke on Kiev if that was all they could do. But there's no way in the world that they were ever going to tolerate that.
And we shouldn't expect them to.
The analogy, though, TC, that, like, look, in the neighborhood, it's theoretically possible, right, that you have a situation where you need a strong, good kid to tell the bully he better leave those other kids alone or he's going to have to deal with you, right? Like, you were a cop, you were a soldier. The idea is, you're the warrior for peace and for those who can't fight for themselves, right? So you take just that same ethic and extend it out, but it's just perfectly self-justifying. And they can never ask themselves, well, wait a minute, maybe we're the bully. Maybe we're the ones who are actually the bad guy in the neighborhood, or at least aggressive enough that you have another kid who, is reacting really against you. You're the hero, you're the star of the football team, but really you're the one who came and destabilized the neighborhood, man, and got everybody fighting, as heroic as you're sure you are. Does that make sense? That's what America does. That's what they're doing here. And look, I know people say it's about money and it's about minerals and it's about all these things. And surely it is about all those things. It's about Cargill and Monsanto and ADM seizing those wheat fields too. It's about, power politics and NATO. It's a media hype and it's a massive conspiracy of interests involved in the thing. But really,
you hit on something.
Is that we're always the good guy. We're always the hero. And therefore, we can never stop threatening the bad guys that they better not move 1 inch or they're going to have to face us. But with that posture, they end up obviously creating these self-fulfilling prophecies. It's the same kind of thing with, well, we have to contain Islam. We got to contain Iraq and Iran from Saudi Arabia. And then what does that do? That turns our own pet terrorists against us for occupying their country to bomb the country next door.
Which you can learn about.
And that one, yeah. It's the same kind of thing again. So look, this isn't to say, oh, Russia's perfectly innocent. And if only America had never done anything, then Putin would just be like what? He would grow younger till he was a schoolboy again and be such a nice little boy, right? Like, I don't think anybody's saying that. But they insist that you assume that he's definitely always coming for everyone all the time if it wasn't for us. And what I'm saying is, look, man, end of the day, you want to really like check the record? I think you'll have to agree. It's America that picked this fight. The Russians are the ones who think, well, both sides think this, but the Russians have a stronger case for they feel like they have been appeasing us and appeasing us and appeasing us, and now they're going to stop. That's the way the Americans always phrase it, right? It's always Neville Chamberlain trying to appease Hitler, and we got to be Churchill and FDR and face Hitler down. But that's what Putin thinks too. Putin compares, he doesn't cite Munich. You know what he does? He cites the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and says, yeah, our forebears tried to appease the Germans and it didn't work. And the lesson there is you can't appease your enemy. You got to go ahead and fight him now. Right? Doesn't he sound just like a Republican and a Democrat?
Well, careful now, because this is why people think that we're like, oh, Putin's a good. We're not. Nobody's like, I know no one in the current, especially anti-war with Russia movement that looks at Putin and goes, actually, he should be sainted. No one's saying that.
He's the John McCain of Russia. This is what he is, right? He repeats the same kind of thinking and portrays
from a Russian perspective.
In DC.
Let me ask this as we get ready. I really want to transition into Provoked, but I've been thinking about this a lot. Listening, yes, there you go. That's that. Do you get tired when you lift that up?
Yeah, it's like CJ Kilmer. Which, by the way, this is a preview copy that still had all the URLs in it. So the final version, everyone, is actually 77 pages shorter than this, just because of the space saved from the URLs.
So you took those 77 pages out and from and you were using them as an anchor for your boat.
That's right. CJ Kilmer goes, oh, guess what, everybody? The Amazon man just brought the book, and I hope he's okay. I saw him trying to trudge it down the driveway. Poor guy. I hope his back is all right.
Oh, Merry Christmas, CJ.
I have to tell you, TC, I thought that, like, okay, when I wrote the first book, it's got Afghanistan in the title, right? Which, in other words, it might as well say, look, don't read me. You know what I mean? I don't even want to read a book about Afghanistan, and that's my topic, And I know people don't want to read a book about Afghanistan. But I'm curious about the body language here, because obviously on one hand it says, wow, that must be impressive, unless it's just him writing about his belly button for 700 pages. There must be a lot in here to know, like, it looks interesting. On the other hand, judge a book by its cover kind of body language thing. Maybe it just looks too intimidating to even want to pick up in the first place, compared especially to the other books. The previous books, 300 pages, they're little bitty things.
Yeah. They're nowhere. They don't come anywhere. They don't weigh in. They're not in the same weight class as far as how much effort it takes to pick them up off the shelf.
If this was that same size and font, it'd be 4 times longer than those.
Yeah, I'm just going to say you've had to have really shrunk them down.
I used every trick in the book I went with 7x10. I used a smaller font. I widened the margins as far as I absolutely possibly could, or shrunk the margins so I could increase the words per line as much as I absolutely possibly could. I took all the URLs out, which, by the way, if you just go to scotthorton.org/provoked/notes, there's all 6,632 footnotes for you there with the working hyperlinks. And also, if you get the Kindle version, the links are still in there too. But
so what he's saying is that it's well researched and footnoted, folks.
That's right. I want people to look. You know what the truth is, man? That, like, the burden of proof is on me, right? Like, if you wrote about your time in the 82nd, like, we all got to take your word for it or whatever. But I wasn't in the 82nd, and I can't tell you any of this stuff exactly firsthand. I'm a great collector of a lot of other people's work, and so I try to show my work all the way through. How do I know every claim that I make? I show you how I know every claim that I make in there, like 8,000 of them.
I think that's what people are missing from so much of the conversation that's taking place, especially, like, with whether it be Rage Against the War Machine or you coming to events to speak on behalf of Defend the Guard. people are hearing this, and what they're hearing a lot of times, just because everything has to be soundbite for them, and you know this. They're hearing, oh, you just hate the country, or you're just disgruntled because you're a vet and you don't like how you're being treated. And I'm like, no, we've been on the inside. You've been on the inside through research. You've seen this stuff. You've watched how people have been lied to and sold this agenda of being anti-Russian. And that's where I was going to turn it just a little bit. We're starting to see this play out more in the common vernacular of the everyday American right now, where there's a drive, and it's been going on for a while, and I know you've noted this, where they're really trying to do the same thing now and elevate China up to being the same level of threat to the United States as the Soviet Union was. And yes, that's been going on for a while, but they're losing some traction with Russia, but they could still get a lot of the anti-war types to really be thinking about how bad the Chi-Coms are for America. And one of the things that made me think about that in relation to your work was you bringing up ADM and Cargill and going in there and seizing these wheat fields. I don't think people understand, for all the complaining we're doing about how dangerous the Chi-Coms are to American interest in America, buying up property and whatnot, we're doing this in places like Ukraine and hindering, and when I say we, it's not the everyday Americans, but we own it some. We're buying up vast tracts of land in what amounts to the breadbasket of Europe, and especially Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. And you touch on that, and you brought it up already. How bad is it right now? How much American interest is in the breadbasket there? How bad are the seizures of these wheat fields and other croplands there?
I don't know. I don't think we're going to know until the end of this war. They've been going for it since, the end, since the coup or the overthrow of 2014 there. I have a section in my book. I'm so sorry. I wish I could remember this footnote off the top of my head. I could picture the guy's website. There's this really great piece about it that I cite, and he had all this other stuff. God, it's in there. It's in there. And again, if you just go to scotthorton.org/provoked/notes, you could just do Control F for Cargill, and I'll bet you just find it in the footnotes. Right? Search for ADM or Monsanto or Cargill, and I bet you go right to my primary source there without even bothering with what I wrote. If you want, you can go find what I was reading about it right there for free. So there's that. I don't think I have a good answer to your question of how much had they gotten away with right now. I just don't know. It's been a little while since I read that section of the book, I guess. And
well, I wonder why.
A little while since I looked into that, man. I'm sorry, but the way it always works is, and this goes back, if you read The Creature from Jekyll Island from the 1990s, right. He describes this, it's the economic hitman. We give you a loan. Our government gives you a loan. Its agents bribe your government, your national government, to accepting the loan. But then the people can't pay it back. So, that's okay. We just take all your resources then. And now we take your publicly owned water and wood and timber and agriculture and oil and whatever, and turn it over to our favored corporations. Then now Nestle owns your lake, and now, your river, and now Cargill owns your wheat fields, and now Exxon owns your oil wells and the rest. So that's just how they do it. They're gangsters. I mean, that's what the American empire does.
And that's why I wanted to tie into the whole the aspect of the look. There's something to be said for maybe Americans shouldn't be selling their property to the Chi-Com government. I get it. Maybe we should think about that. But the idea that it's only the Chi-Coms, that no one else is doing that, is once again part and parcel of just how bad the American expansionism really is.
Well, and also you have to keep in mind the relative power between China and America. America is the world empire. It's not like we're a tiny, pathetic vassal state and we've been completely pwned by the Chinese and they're taking over our property, through gangsterism. they're buying that property from willing sellers here. And ultimately, the land stays here. They can't run off with it. So mostly what that represents is just them parking their money here because it's safer here than there, maybe.
Yeah, right. So harder for us to seize their money when it's here for some reason. I don't know.
I know that there are like, pattern recognizers who are saying, oh my goodness, they're buying up all of our food resources and stuff. And I think that's a little too far. And I think if it ever really got that way, we're like, wow, their government is willing to put up unlimited funds to buy up every food processor in America or something, then yeah, that would be a problem. But I don't think that's what we're really facing there. And honestly, like, I don't even think the Republicans and the Democrats would let them do that. You know what I mean? Like they have their own interests, and in their states they have their own state governments and their connected interests there. So I think we're pretty safe from China here. The real threat from China is that they have a navy powerful enough to keep us away. And so, people conflate, and who knows the whole future, but people conflate China's apparent willingness to seize Taiwan through force, which is part of China. It's recognized by the United States as being part of China, but not reunited, completely autonomous from them.
Right.
But people can, and they built up a navy clearly with the intent to be able
defending that interest,
and to keep us away while they do it. So maybe that's imminent and maybe it's not, but clearly they built up that much of a military force to be able to do it. But people then immediately jump from there to, well, yeah, because they want to take over the whole world. But then I just think, like, you must not have seen the shape of the whole world before, and you're conflating this, supposed renegade province full of Chinese people, ethnic Han Chinese and Chinese speakers. And yeah, there were native Taiwanese. They're not the ones we're talking about. They are almost all dead and eliminated. They're a very small minority, whoever of them are left, if any. But these are all ethnic Chinese and Chinese speakers, and their countries, their nations, so to speak, are more and more integrated all the time anyway. It would make very little difference for the sovereignty to change at this point anyway. There's billions of dollars in trade back and forth and travel back and forth and all of these things. And then people go from there to like, yep, then they're going to invade Japan, and then they're going to invade South Korea, and then they're going to invade and occupy Australia. And then they're going to march through Central Asia and conquer all the stands and Russian Siberia. And tell me when I can stop making up a bunch of crap about the unlimited resources of China to conquer the planet with.
Which is exactly what I was looking at when I'm like, it's the exact same threat scenario that they used with the Soviet Union and are now applying to China, as well as back to applying it just to Russia proper under Putin.
Right. Which, by the way, like, look, if you go back to those days, which I know you remember well, Russia and China had an official alliance, and they were both communists, and they were allied together. Whereas now they have no military alliance. They're friends, and we're pushing them back together more and more and more all the time. But China is an authoritarian police state. It's not exactly communist. They have a single party state, but they abandoned Marxism, which, this is something that's always kind of puzzled me about the right, is people will complain about the communists killed 40 million Chinese. But then it sounds like they're glad that they did, because if they hadn't, then they'd be around right now, and we hate and fear them. So then they abandon Marxism and they adopt Milton Friedman style Chicago school economics, and they get rich. And now we hate and fear them. Oh no, they're rich. Well, do you prefer they're starving because the government stole all their grain and their hoe and shot their ox in the head for offending them or whatever?
Yeah, you can't win in these scenarios at all. It's just like no matter what you bring in your argument against what are.
And then here's one more rant I have about the Chinese here, is I blame the whole world on George W. Bush, because the thing is, even as horrible as Bill Clinton was, everyone on earth, well, pretty much, like, even in the East, they know of our calendar in a way that we don't know of theirs. Everybody knew it was the year 2000, the odometer flipping over, a new millennium, not just a new century, but a new millennium kicking off. And then they put George W. Bush in the chair to call all the shots and do all the things. And he made a mockery out of everything that is important to the West, that matters the most to the West, including Christianity, although I won't comment too much on that because that's a little bit outside of my purview, but he invoked it all the time, constantly, as he waged his aggressive wars, Protestant Christianity, as well as he invoked, our civic religion, Thomas Jefferson, in our Declaration of Independence, and the inherent natural freedom and dignity of each individual human person. Free market economics, property rights, freedom. That's the highest political value, George W. Bush said, as he carpet bombed the planet and killed 4 million people and destabilized a massive region. And
we had to take their lives to give them freedom.
That's right. And just absolutely made such a mockery. I mean, honestly, and look, I know you're old enough to understand this along with me. I don't know about everyone in the audience if they can understand it or not, but the absolute silliness, the hollowness of liberty and freedom and the American way and the red, white, and blue and the leaders of world ethics and all of this stuff. People used to sort of kind of believe in that stuff. Yeah. Like in a lot of places in the world, certainly a lot more than today, where now it sounds like just some marketing crap. It just sounds fake. It's
hard to find Americans that believe that stuff these days.
And look, and it's because of him. And I'm perfectly happy to blame everybody else too, but he was the one sitting in the chair who decided he had to launch this aggressive war against a country that could have never threatened us. And he didn't have enough excuses to do it. So he had to invoke our Declaration of Independence as his excuse, our principles of the Declaration as his excuse to launch an aggressive war. He had to invoke our free market principles so he could spend $10 trillion bankrolling corrupt cronies and ultimately cratering, as they called it, the entire global economy, inflating a massive bubble that led to a crash that brought the whole dang world down with it. Now,
and the only ones that didn't suffer were the military-industrial complex.
Right. Now in China, just like in Afghanistan and everywhere else, all this stuff about the American way sounds like a bunch of crap now. I mean, everybody knows that George W. Bush's secret police tortured people to death. So now you want to talk to us all about freedom and liberty. Oh, the Statue of Liberty. Blah, 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 man. The whole world, I'm not saying the whole world hates our country, but as far as our principles that we would have liked to advertise and sell to the world, say, for example, like, just because you mean well, not because you care only about American imperial interests, but just because you mean well for humanity, you might think, you might prefer to see in China an independent and separate legislative and judicial branch and regular elections. And I don't know, 50 cantons with their own individual Republican governments too, like we have. I might believe that the Chinese would be better off with a constitution like ours, not like theirs, right? How in the world could we expect to sell them on the best principles of American liberty and republicanism, right, when our flag is just as red as theirs, soaked in blood?
Yep.
It makes no sense, and it didn't work. And so in China, they were like, well, we'll listen to your Milton Friedman, but we don't give a damn about this Murray Rothbard. We don't really care about your James Madison, right? We're not really interested in your civic liberty. We're perfectly happy to, have, public and privately owned corporations doing business. But that's not everything when it comes to freedom. And so they abandoned some of communism and kept the rest. And I'm not saying everything would have been perfect, but what if George Bush hadn't have kicked off the terror war and hadn't have been the world's worst hypocrite? What if he had lectured everybody all day about freedom, but without killing people all day, every day? What if he'd wrapped up the war on terrorism by Christmas 2001, as he could have, and then spent the rest of his presidency recommending the classics of, Locke and Montesquieu and Madison to the world?
You're assuming he has any idea what those are.
But he did sort of kind of at least internalize his own public relations about spreading freedom. You know what I mean? He talked about it enough. You know, like they say, attitude follows behavior. He talked about enough where he's like, yeah, that's why I'm doing this. Freedom. You know what I mean? Like there was some of that.
Oh no, he did. Yeah, he definitely talked about it.
But it was just stupid and wrong. And so now, like, honestly, man, how could you expect any, like, I don't know, educated upper middle class Chinese businessman from Shanghai to take American style political liberty seriously? When it's obviously a hollow, cynical excuse to steal and lie and kill, just like every other government. There's no more, ethics in American governance compared to anywhere else.
And I think that applies across the board, whether we're talking about the Far East, the Middle East, or Eastern Europe. As we, we sit here and we talk about Ukraine being a free and democratic country, and that's like, okay, weren't they up until we sent in Vicky, as Monica Perez likes to refer to her as Vicky the Noodle. We send Victoria Nuland in there, and I still have people that'll look at me to this day and deny that was a orchestrated overthrow of a duly elected pro-Russian president. Because if they're pro-Russian, we can't have that. We cannot have a pro-Russian head of a government in Eastern Europe, because that doesn't serve the American interest. People just will absolutely deny that was orchestrated by United States deep state. And
by Joe Biden. Like, seriously, man, if I told you Joe Biden made a bad decision one time, you're going to sit here and balk and be like, no, dude, let's go fist fight out in the street, because I'm not going to tolerate you talking bad about my Joe Biden. Why would he do something wrong, TC? That doesn't make any sense.
So let me ask you, do you think, as you were researching the book, do you think that the sole reason, because the war hawks of both sides, I mean, the neocons have taken over both the parties. To some degree, the Republicans have managed some sort of weird thing where they have seemed to kind of like get the neocons to all support the Democrats right now, which is just the most, I never thought I'd see this happen in my lifetime. I have to admit, it was the most mind-blowing thing I have ever experienced.
That's where they come from. They just went back again.
Right. But do you think the reason why the war hawk side of the Republican Party is so anti-Ukraine involvement is because they know deep down inside that it was Obama and Biden that orchestrated that, while they remain so pro-war, Taiwan, Iran, and whatnot?
Yeah,
all those others we can't mention. Why is it they're so anti-Ukraine?
No, sir, I would have to say that there are. Okay, if you phrased it this way and just said that there are like fewer Republicans who are bad on Ukraine, but who are, also still bad on other things, like I buy that. But like, as far as like, the real war party, the real leadership of the Republican Party, they haven't changed. They're all, I mean, if you look at, for example, all the people that Trump has just appointed to his cabinet, they're all hawks on this. And even J.D. Vance is like, never mind that stuff I used to say. Now I say we got to be tough and roll them back. So,
but they haven't. But even Hegseth is like way pro-war on this side, but nope, we're done with Ukraine. And I cannot figure out why they're saying so adamantly pro-war on one hand.
I don't think they really. Yeah, I think.
Do you don't think that they're against?
Horton's law says that a politician will always break his good promises and keep all his bad ones. Right. So I think what you're getting there is like, yeah, they say some good things, but you just got to watch really carefully what they do. And ultimately, Hegseth is a great example of this. Like, he just comes from George W. Bush Republicanism. In fact, they even saw he had a thing that was, I think it must have been Michael Tracy who found this, that he had a group that was called Veterans for Greatness or whatever the crap it was. I'm sorry. It was Veterans for something. And the whole point of it was to argue for keeping us in the Iraq War. And it was financed by not Kenneth Edelman. That's a different Edelman. By Miriam Adelson and Sheldon Adelson, her husband, Sheldon Adelson. She's the widow now. He just died. But these are Israeli spies, basically. She's an Israeli and he's an American Zionist, casino owner. And back 20 years ago, or 18 or whatever, late Bush years, these Israelis, these Likud agents were financing Hegseth's group, his sock puppet group, to keep us in the Iraq war. So he's no dove of any kind, dude. All these, look, and I'm sorry to break people's hearts about this, but come on, just be honest. Trump was never a Russian agent. He's an Israeli agent. And he always was. And all the people around him are. His son-in-law, all these people are, Marco Rubio, Hegseth, all these people, they were picked by Miriam Adelson. And she is Likud. She's not an agent of any American interest at all.
She's not even AIPAC.
Israel has pwned your asses, guys. Let me elaborate. Under compassionate conservative center-right George W. Bush, we had Paul Wolfowitz and Scooter Libby and Douglas Feith and Richard Pearl and Abram Shulsky and the whole neocon crew. Oh, but you're sick of that, aren't you? No, you don't like that compassionate conservative, neoconservative centrism at war, at permanent war anymore. What you need is good, tough, right-wing American, Christian, veteran-led, upper body strength, tough guy warmongers who also are absolute clones of Paul Wolfowitz and absolute slaves of the exact same thinking, ideology, and paymasters as the neoconservatives. And that's all they did. They just ran aside. They go, oh no, George W. Bush is out of style. We can't get John McCain or Mitt Romney elected because people don't like that. People want a populist. So they painted Donald Trump in Buchanan face. But it's a lie. It's a lie. You don't
line
be
ever.
a sucker and believe in lies, everybody. You just don't.
That's the best line ever.
By the way, that's total plagiarism from the great Arthur Bloom.
I'm glad. I don't care. I had not heard that one. So even from the great Arthur Bloom. So here we sit. The election was a few weeks back now. And in order to show that the United States is approaching the results of the election with clear-headed thinking and eyes wide open as to the importance of geopolitical politics and coming to the table with reasonable people, our illustrious president has gone so far to not only continue funding Ukraine's efforts, but now authorizing the use of American long-range weapon systems into Russia. And people are talking about this could, if this doesn't get brought under control real damn fast, we might be in far worse shape going into the new administration than we thought. Do you think that we're coming to a point, from all the study that you've done in writing the book, do you think we're coming to a point where Putin might get pushed across the line he can't back off of?
Nah. I mean, look, I'm not trying to say don't worry about it. I'm arguing to end this war yesterday, of course. This should have been treated as the greatest emergency from all of mankind. We should have all insisted on an immediate ceasefire, no matter what. Work it out. Stop fighting first. Work it out second. That's been, that's been my position since before the war started and ever since.
Right.
But I'm not going to sit here and tell you people to panic and buy my book. You know what I mean? It's not like that. The truth is,
don't panic. Still buy the book.
You know who's in danger? The Ukrainians are in a lot of danger. And Putin is already escalating in Ukraine. And he's promised to escalate further in Ukraine. And there are plenty of targets left for him to escalate against in Ukraine. So.
Is that because he actually showed restraint compared to what we were told that he wasn't, that he was getting his ass kicked and wasn't showing restraint?
He's been in the chair for 25 years, man. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be an FBI profiler to have like some kind of idea of his psychology, what he's about and what he's like. And clearly he's a technocrat, right? He's a clerk. He's a cautious, he may be a throat-slitting sociopath, but he's not the emotional type, right? He's
the cold, calculated type.
yeah. I mean, he's a strong man, but he's all business. And he would be, well, two things. First of all, he would be a fool to escalate now. And as we're recording this, it's the last day of November. So he's got 6 weeks, right? 7. So, I wish I could say he had 2 weeks, right? 7 is still a long time, but he's got 7 weeks until the guy's inaugurated who ran on ending the war and making a peace deal, which is obviously going to be advantageous to him no matter what. So
he does not come out on the losing end of that.
That's right. So now here's where he loses. If he escalates and hits Warsaw, then Donald Trump has to get on TV and beat his chest and say tough guy threats. He has to. Right before he's even sworn in, he has to say, you and me are going out in the front yard to fight before he even gets in there. He has to toss all his conciliatory stuff in the trash and now change his whole orientation to, oh yeah, well, I'm going to escalate on my side before I'm willing to meet you at any table. Putin doesn't want to do that. He'd be a fool to do that. So here's my second point. I think that's what Biden was counting on, right? Biden is
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think Biden was actually shooting for that?
That's right. He goes, look, and I'm just making this up from, I read some things in the newspapers. I'm just sort of speculating about most of this, but it only makes sense logically that, look, they just lost an election to a guy running on, I'm going to end this war. And they know it. And they know that Putin knows it. And in fact, he's the previous president. So Putin has met him before and knows exactly who he's dealing with and what he meant by what he said about why he wants to end the war and what, right? Total known quantity to the Russians already. Not like in the lies you heard, but just because he was already the president before, right? So Biden's men obviously calculated that now we can sit there and sucker punch him a few times and he will be restrained from doing anything too rash about it, like in the fear-mongering, deploying atom bombs, or going ahead and hitting Warsaw or Berlin or London or something like that, or DC, and doing something to severely escalate the war, as I think you put it in your question, World War III. So you're going to plunge us into that when he's just got 6-7 weeks to spare before he can ramp things way down in a way where he already won the war anyway. He already got what he wanted anyway. He's virtually done seizing Donetsk province, which Luhansk and Donetsk are the real prizes. And he's got most of Zaporozhye and Kherson. He might be willing to settle for just what he's already taken there rather than the entire oblast there. I guess we'll see how that goes. But
because he's definitely not going to give it up in a negotiation.
Yeah, well, yes, I don't think he's giving up the 4 provinces, and he might even insist on, we want your troops out. We want all 4 provinces on their old, where their borders have always been. But look, that's because he won the war. It's just like saying, yeah, but the Taliban are going to demand to take over the north of the country too. Yeah, well, they won the war, so that's the way it goes. Same thing here. It's like, yeah, the Russians are going to have as much of the east as they want, basically. And Donald Trump and Zelensky don't really have any cards to play. What are they going to do? What can Trump do? Oh, I'm going to pour in a bunch of tanks. We tried that, dude. Welcome to the history of the last 2 years, pal. So what's he going to do? He's going to bring in the U.S. Navy? No way. So,
well, then he's, like you said, the Horton's law. break all his good promises, keep all his bad ones. When you look at your research that you did to write Provoked, the thing that it's easy for everybody to pinpoint is the breaking of the promise, the gentleman's agreement with Bush about not expanding the borders of NATO one inch, one red run quarter mile. Uh-oh, I lost Scott. Oh, there.
No,
you phased out. Oh, you blanked out on my end for a second. There you go.
I was just holding real still.
I don't know how you do that. The one thing that everybody points to is how the United States has continued under the auspices of NATO to expand NATO borders.
Right.
Just a real quick yes or no. Do you think that was ultimately the provocation for why? Okay. 2, at the end of the day, provided that the Biden administration and others do not find some just perfect button to push that really provokes him even further and he's able to maintain his calm demeanor, do you think that Russia under Putin walks away with an actually inked and solidified, notarized, we will not expand NATO's borders, Ukraine will remain neutral, or do you think that'll be off the table?
What a great question. I mean, the first answer is, boy, politics in DC are going to be very upset. Again, these are the people who stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years because they couldn't admit that it didn't work. 20 years and then lost anyway. They are going to absolutely pitch a fit and pretend that everything would have been fine if only we weren't selling out our friends, which is just not true. So just like I argued in my book about Afghanistan, you can get back to me. If they extend the war another 10 years or another 20 years, it's the same dynamic. Once we leave, the government we've been propping up is going to fall. Same thing here. America can help to sustain Ukraine at war for a while, although they're steadily losing territory anyway. But ultimately, as Barack Obama put it, this is Russia's most vital interest. And it's just not that important to us. Hell, to ruin it for you, I even quote Robert Kagan saying, we never cared that the Russians were dominant in Ukraine during the Cold War. Why do we care now? That's Victoria Nuland's husband. Said, hey, you know what? Actually, it doesn't matter at all to us. Well, God dang it, man. What are we doing then? We don't have to do this at all. So look, and people will say, oh, but we can't let Russia get away with it. Changing a border in Europe like this, who knows what'll come next? Too bad. Get in your time machine and don't vote Democrat and dumb, because this is what Europe did. It's too late. You can't undo it. I'll tell you what it would take. And I think Mr. 82nd Airborne, what it would take to reverse Russia's gains in eastern Ukraine. It would take sending in the 82nd Airborne and the U.S. Navy. And without that, it's not going to happen. And with that, we have a general war between NATO and Russia and a general nuclear war, and we all die. So that's it. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have provoked this conflict. Now you got your friends into a mess, and they are going to be weakened and broken and crippled and lose their eastern territories. You're still never going to be able to bring them into your alliance anyway. Or they're just going to get invaded again. And so, what's the lesson? Damn the American empire. They keep doing this. It's the same story they did to the Hmong tribesmen in Vietnam. It's the same thing that they did to the Hazaras, the Tajiks, and the Uzbeks in Afghanistan. Yep. And look, again, I wrote the book on time to get out of Afghanistan. There ain't no point in staying. But also, I am very sorry to the Hazaras. Good luck, guys. I don't know what else to tell you, dude. There's nothing that we can do for you more. We already
made you all these promises, and we broke them all.
Yeah. We not only did we protect them, but we use them to fight against the Pashtuns. So now when the Pashtuns come back, it's like the people who allied with the Nazis against the communists. Well, the communists won the war, so those people were in deep shit later,
What do you, having studied the rise of, I don't even like to call it the rise, but because it was an installment, but who did Zelensky replace? I can't remember his name right now.
Poroshenko.
Yeah, Poroshenko. When we installed Poroshenko and he wasn't working out, and we decided he needed to go, and we put Zelensky in. What do you think caused them to pick him, and what do you think is going to happen to him at the signing of a peace deal? Or does he even make it to a peace deal?
Well, both good questions. I mean, in the first place, I'm not certain that it was the Americans who just rigged that election. I mean, I think essentially their idea was I don't know, if there was a panel, secret or otherwise, vetting who was allowed to run. But the people of the East are already excluded, essentially, right? So it's going to be a contest between acceptable candidates from acceptable parties in the first place, because the unacceptable parties are already excluded, right?
Yeah.
And then Poroshenko, and I don't know exactly the role of the Americans or the British in helping this along. Really, I don't think have any indication that they played a direct role in this. But it was Igor Kolomoisky the Ukrainian oligarch who financed Zelensky. And he was a TV star. As you know, he started in a comedy show where he was a public school teacher who had a viral video ranting about the government and ended up becoming the president. And so then they ran him for president. And Kolomoisky put a bunch of money behind him and his TV channel behind him. And he's a Russian speaker from Kharkiv, a Jewish Ukrainian from Kharkiv, and a Russian speaker who was, clearly not pro-Russia, clearly not, favoring them, and was clearly a Ukrainian patriot, but who wanted peace with Russia and wanted to figure out a way to end the war. That was what he ran on, and that was how he won. And he crushed Poroshenko in the election of 2019. Absolutely destroyed him on the basis of, like Richard Nixon, I have a secret plan to end the war. That's how he won. And then, but as soon as he got in there, and this goes to the second question, what happens to him? As soon as he got in there, he tried to adopt what was called the Steinmeier formula, which was named after a German diplomat. It was his sort of corollary to the Minsk II deal. It was a game plan for how to implement it. That, was a slight revision, but that would hopefully be a compromise because the Ukrainians were balking on the order of operations for implementing the deal. And so essentially saying that the Russians had to completely give up control of even the border before they could hold elections at all, which was not what the deal said. So Steinmeier said, well, here, we got this plan for implementing the Minsk II peace deal. And as soon as he did that, the Nazis held rallies all across Kiev and the West it was called the No to Capitulation movement. And it was led by the Nazis. And they repeatedly threatened that they would murder the president if he signed the deal. They said, no, he will not disgrace the martyrs who died in the war. And repeatedly, they said, well, hang him from the tree on the main drag in Kiev. I can't remember how to pronounce the name of the street. But anyway, he'll be hanging from a tree if he tries to do this, said Dmitry Yarosh, for example, an extremely important neo-Nazi leader there. And these were credible threats. Even, I always forget, but I just remembered the name. It's Andrew Kramer. Yep. I got to remember Kramer like on Seinfeld busting in the door. That bald-headed Andrew guy in the Times. It's Kramer like on Seinfeld, Horton. Okay, it's Andrew Kramer is the footnote. God dang, I've been forgetting that name like the last 7 interviews.
Well, it's good. We got it nailed down now.
Thank you, TC. You helped me. Is Andrew Kramer in the New York Times says, hey, these are credible threats, kid. I don't know what to tell you. These people have overthrown the government twice with America's help, of course. And when they threaten to kill the president, he's in danger. This isn't just like some kook in America threatens the president and the president is in fact not in danger. Well, maybe Donald Trump because they won't protect him, obviously. But the others, at least, under American government protection, no Nazi kook is allowed to threaten Joe Biden and get away with it, for example, right?
And shouldn't be.
And shouldn't be. That's right, of course. But I'm just saying in Ukraine, no, he has to worry about that.
Yeah, that's a legit threat there.
It's a matter of like, please, somebody take care of this for me. It's not taken care of. And that was why
it's not like 6 guys sitting in their basement drinking German brewed beer, glorifying the good old days. These are a legit group of people, a very large group of people in Ukraine.
Yeah, and by the way, when I call them Nazis, I don't mean, they're Trump supporters. I mean, no, these guys are Hitler-loving white supremacist, national socialist.
Legit Nazis.
Yeah. Dude, they're Nazis. Ukrainian ones. And the direct descendants, unlike American Nazis, direct descendants of the guys who fought for Hitler in the Second World War.
Yes.
Right? American Nazis' fathers all fought against Hitler, right?
Yeah, right. That's ironically.
Here. But there were some of these guys actually served the Third Reich in the war and helped implement the Holocaust and the rest of it. And these are their grandsons who founded the and their sons and grandsons who founded the current Nazi organizations in question.
Aren't a couple of the old timers still kicking around over there? I thought a couple of them were still hiding out somewhere, but
I don't know about the oldest ones, but certainly like their sons.
Yeah. Is that like Zelensky's like whisked out of country, you think? Do you think he's like gone? Like
we were joking a couple years ago. Yeah, his end is either Brookings or a bullet, right?
Yeah, I mean it's got to be Brookings. Or he's in a lot of trouble. So
I should have made that a section in my book. Brookings
or a bullet. Sorry, folks. Revision is coming, and it's all my fault.
There you go. That'll be the new title of the book. That should be my next book. Brookings or a bullet. What's Zelensky gonna do now?
That might actually be more manageable for you. You might be able to get that one done in less time.
Yeah, seriously, that sounds like 1,000 words and done.
That's almost a blog post. So we walk out of this here in a few weeks, hopefully in a few weeks, with new boundaries for Ukraine and Russia. We walk out of it hopefully with what we can only hope will be finally an inked and dried and like I said, notarized commitment that Ukraine remains out of NATO. Does that change much going forward? Does that put the focus now out of Eastern Europe, and are we going to have to be concerned about them upping their focus on Iran now? Or do you think that they have the wherewithal to shift that direction? Or
no? And I don't think Trump wants war with Iran. And the Pentagon doesn't want war with Iran. British Petroleum doesn't want war with Iran. And there's too much at stake there. They're not going to do that. I think it's going to not be so cut and dry to solve this problem, TC. The deal is, man, that as Neil Ferguson said in that debate the other day, that the Ukrainians are in a position of weakness. It's going to be very difficult for Donald Trump to just swoop in there and say, okay, sign a deal where you just lose everything. Especially from his kind of businessman point of view, it's a pretty bad deal to have to sign. But it's not his fault. It's all his predecessors' fault, his intercessors' fault, not his. But, like in your previous 2 or 3 questions ago, like, look, he's going to have to sell Ukraine out really hard to get them to sign a deal. And I'm not sure if he's willing to. I don't know that he is. I know that everyone around him is a kook. Virtually every one of them. Tulsi Gabbard's okay on a lot of issues. She's really bad on the Sunnis is what she's worst on. She's pretty good on Russia. She's just the DNI. She's not a diplomat or,
right.
Even the head of the CIA. I'm not sure how much influence she'd have there, but and I don't know how
stiff going to be the biggest
play. Putin might try to be magnanimous here and try to work out something on the order of a compromise, if only to speed things up, not out of the goodness of his heart, anyone listening, but just to try.
He hasn't ingratiated himself to the Russian people during this. That's for sure.
I mean, he might bring a gun to the negotiations and be like, I want everything that I want. Sign on the dotted line, in which case Trump is going to balk and we'll have a whole new problem. I saw Zelensky say, okay, maybe we will negotiate land for peace, but we want NATO membership. Well, you know what, man? I have to say, I could see Trump signing on to that. Trump added Northern Macedonia and Montenegro to NATO. I could see him making a deal like that, if only because I can picture all of us screaming no, and then him doing it anyway.
Man, that makes me nervous, Scott.
Well, look, it would obviously be a bad move. But the thing is, and this goes, not that he's here, but this goes to another thing that Niall Ferguson was saying in that debate the other day. It was like, well, he didn't invade Finland as soon as they joined NATO. But the thing is, first of all, they're in the middle of a war.
Oh my gosh.
They're already busy in the middle of a war with Ukraine. Yeah. But also, as Putin said, we don't have an ongoing border dispute with Finland. We're essentially getting along just fine with Finland right now. They don't have a large Russian population stranded behind Finnish lines being persecuted by the Finnish national government that's declared a full-scale culture war against them and bombed them and all these things. In Ukraine, not only do you have this massive ethnic Russian population declared outlaws and outside of the protection of the national government that's been killing for 8 years.
That voted to go to Russia.
But you also have the situation of Crimea since 2014, where because of Obama and Biden and their horrible decisions in overthrowing the government there, that led to the loss of Crimea. But see, to the Russians, they already reincorporated Crimea as part of the Russian Federation. Full stop, passed legislation, he signed it, everything, right? But Ukraine says, no, Crimea still belongs to us. We refuse to recognize your sovereignty over it. You're just squatting on it. But it's our peninsula, and including that naval base too. And Putin said this on the eve of war. He goes, don't you see how if I allow you to bring Ukraine into NATO, well, I have this ongoing dispute over the sovereignty over Crimea. This could lead directly to a war. What if they attack Crimea and I attack their forces in Crimea? They'll say I'm the aggressor and invoke Article 5.
Article 5, yep, I was just going to say that.
Yeah, and there was a French reporter was asking him about this, and he starts snap at her and says, do you want war between Russia and France? Because that's what it'll mean. Do you understand? If we bring Ukraine into NATO and then we have a fight over Crimea, then that means I'm going to fight with you, lady. And she's like, oh, yeah. So
you said something.
It was they were up against what else are we supposed to do? Again, not to justify what they did, but to explain their reasoning was we can't allow this to go any further.
But that you said something, two things actually that I think are really important, and we both touched on it. Nobody's sitting here going, Putin's a saint. Like, nobody's saying that, but I've heard you say this and I've heard others say this. Like, you can only do so much. You can only do so much saber rattling. You can only move so many troops around before you look at something. And I think you've used this before. If they started moving troops into Mexico and Canada, we'd be like, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. How long are we going to let that go on?
Not even for a day.
Not a chance. Not a chance. But the other thing that I wish people would understand, and this is our nerdy side, those of us that have moved into libertarian philosophy, this is where the nerdy side comes out, and I know you know this. People do not understand that NATO, with Article 5, like, that's a death pact. That's an absolute death pact. People have got to understand that. When you admit a country into NATO, it's not like bringing somebody into the UN. That's a war pact. You're signing a war pact. 1 inch, one rocket, one missile into your country, we're there for you, which is almost what happened when the Ukrainians misfired that one missile, what was it, a year and a half ago now, and it killed the farmers in Poland. Poland's president was out there demanding that Article 5 be invoked. Until
imagine that on a mistake, on a bad report.
Exactly. That's how bad this is.
In that case, you're right. It was an errant Ukrainian missile, an anti-aircraft missile that, malfunctioned, went off course and crossed the line into Poland and miraculously hit a building with 2 people in it and killed them. But it could have been a Russian missile that was errant and missed its target and crossed the line into Poland. Then what? What if it wasn't our friends, the Ukrainians, that did it? What if it had been the Russians who did it? Then we're going to invoke Article 5 and go to war over one stupid missile strike? Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. All it takes is the one member nation saying we've been attacked. We have been attacked.
And now, not exactly, because the treaty itself says, well, and then the national governments involved will have to decide what to do to assist. So it's a little vague there, but still, it would be treated as automatic, of course.
Yes.
Especially with the modern American imperial court in D.C. They won't even stop and think about it for a minute.
Exactly. What's the way forward, you think, having done all the research that you've done? And we've talked about what the next few weeks could look like, and whether or not they're going to keep trying to ramp up the pressure on Putin to make a bad mistake, which I don't see him making, and I don't think you see him doing it either. Is it going to be? Do you think it's going to be pretty tenuous over the next 4 years? Over there, waiting to see who comes in next for the next presidency.
I really don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen, man. There's so much up in the air now. And including, I saw today the New York Times published a letter, an email that Pete Hegseth's mother wrote to him about what a woman abuser he was. So he may be sunk and not even, I don't know if that's going to affect him at all, quite frankly, but they're going after him. And so we might be having a whole different conversation about an entirely different Secretary of Defense here. And personnel is policy, as they say. Donald Trump says, "Oh, I brought John Bolton with me just to scare everybody." Yeah, John Bolton ruined your diplomacy, dude. Smart thinking.
That's terrifying language to use. I've
And by the way,
heard you talk about that before. That just terrifies
and that's not
me.
even the true history of what happened. What happened was Sheldon Adelson appointed John Bolton to be the national security advisor because, again, Donald Trump is an Israeli spy. And that's who controlled his government then. And that rotten corpse's wife is in charge now.
Is it?
Sorry.
Are we going to see? No. Do you think we're going to see like a moderately swift resolution to the Ukraine-Russia conflict and a lot more focus on backing? And I know that probably try. I don't want to go on. You need to go boating. Do you think do you think the focus is going to now be even more on the Middle East, Gaza, Lebanon, Beirut in particular, and going forward, just because we're going to be able to take our eyes off of what's going on in Ukraine? Or I'm actually more unsettled with what's going to happen in the Middle East right now, to be honest with you. I am not at all convinced that we are out of danger by any stretch of the
back to Tulsi Gabbard there. I mean, if you're talking about the recent news where Al-Qaeda has seized Aleppo in just the last few days in a giant coup de main, they just rolled right in there and seized it. Remember, Tulsi Gabbard got in so much trouble for being good on this because she was in Iraq War II. So the Sunni-based insurgency in Iraq War II, which was connected to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, that was the enemy to her. Then they told her, no, they're the heroes on the Syrian side of the line. They're the Free Syrian Army, the moderate rebels, and we love them. And she was like, I don't love them because I still know who's who. And unlike everyone else in D.C., it's a real measure of how absolutely idiotic everyone in D.C. is. Because, I mean, obviously a lot of them are just, Israeli agents lying, but a lot of them are just dumber than hell and honestly could not tell you that the Sunni insurgency in Syria is the Sunni insurgency from Iraq from 2 months ago, you dum-dums. No, they couldn't follow that train of thought. So instead, no, it's the moderate rebels against the evil dictator, or whatever their little silly story that they told themselves was. That was the old dirty war 10 years ago. They backed Al-Qaeda so bad it turned into the Islamic State Caliphate. And then they had to launch Iraq War III to blow it back up again, which is a war that wasn't even over until the first year of Trump's presidency. They've wrapped that up finally at, through 17 and into early 18.
And then we took out the leading Iranian general that was actually fighting the war on our side.
That's right. That's right. And
especially
sorry,
anti-Iran people, Suleiman was fighting for us. So
that's right. In Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit, it was American air power in the air and Iranians Quds Force on the ground leading the fight. How do you like that? Only against the Bin Ladenites that Obama had built a caliphate for them, and then he had to destroy it again because, oops, that was like, they were supposed to sack Damascus, not Mosul, god dang it. So they had to go and turn that thing around. But now this is the same thing again now. But now Hezbollah has already got their own problems going on in Lebanon. And so they're not there to help the Syrians. Whether Iran sends a legion or two or nobody remains to be seen. The Russians, of course, also helped save Assad last time. Well, they're busy now. They're already in Syria doing some airstrikes, but clearly their attention is divided. And so, boy, I tell you, Donald Trump is heading into a very rough season just as he starts here. I did see a headline today that said that he wants a ceasefire in Gaza before he's sworn in. He's let it be known Israel wrap this thing up. So I don't know whether he's going to get that or not. I really would very much like to know what is his relationship with Netanyahu now, honestly. I hope that
there's so much connection there as you and I both are aware of.
I mean, he is so beholden to Adelson.
Yeah.
And they say, that Trump really resented Netanyahu congratulating Biden on his election victory right away last time around. But then again, I also had read that, they've met numerous times since then and had totally patched things up since then. And
his son-in-law is in deep with him too. So,
well, and Trump told Netanyahu reportedly finish the job. So that's peace to him, is kill them all. And then once they're all dead, then you're done. People say, oh, when Donald Trump hates Jews. First of all, he's completely philo-Semitic as far as that goes. But even if you really thought that that was true, that he's just such a white guy that he automatically is anti-Semitic, well, then what do you think he thinks of Arabs? You think he loves Arabs more than Jews? Come on. If he doesn't like Jews, then he despises Arabs and doesn't care if the Israelis kill every last one of them, and which apparently is the case. And I wonder if you told him, hey, you know, like a fifth of those Palestinians are Christians, dude. That's who the Israelis are killing. The Christians aren't on the Israeli Jewish side. It's the Israeli Jews are killing the Palestinian Muslims and Christians too. Does he even know or care about that? That was one of the reasons that he was against Al-Qaeda in Syria. It's because they're killing Christians. Well, who's killing the Christians in Palestine?
Not to mention the fact that there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Jewish individuals who are absolutely despise the Zionist movement in Gaza and across the globe, really.
Hey, even a solid majority in Israel wants peace right now.
Absolutely.
It's like 60% want a ceasefire right now in Israel.
Netanyahu can't give it up because once he's done, he's out of office. They're coming for him.
Yeah, and it ain't just hundreds, TC. It's most American Jews favor peace. Most American Jews are not hawks. You know, same with Iraq.
Before you go, who do you think is the best pick of the incoming administration and the worst pick of the incoming administration?
Okay, the best is going to be Gabbard, but the worst thing about her is her pathological, irrational hatred and fear of the Sunnis, which she shares with the worst pick, Sebastian Gorka, who's an absolute idiot and also a fanatical war on terror guy.
And for those who haven't been paying attention, Gabbard is the DNI pick and Gorka is the...
Yeah. But now Gabbard, look, at least she can tell a Sunni from a Shiite, man.
Yeah.
And at least, again, why was she good on Syria? She was stationed at Balad Air Base in Iraq. And so she saw guys die of fighting the Sunnis. Now, it's true that America fought the Shiites and about 500 guys died fighting the Shiites. That was all David Petraeus' fault. And that was only a couple of different times. And I guess in 2004 and then again in 2008. Otherwise, the whole war was for the Shiites against the Sunni-based insurgency. And that's who she saw young men dying, crying for their mom as they died. That was who they had been fighting. And she was getting shelled by him too. Like, you know, she's an official combat vet. Not that she was pulling triggers, but she was getting shelled at the base where she was stationed north of Baghdad. So a hell of a lot more than anybody ever fired at me, man. So like,
no kidding.
But so that's why she could not be convinced to hate Assad more than the Bin Ladenites. There's just no way. You could have waterboarded her and she'd have told you to go to hell. It was never going to work, right? So at least there's that. But then when it comes to the Bin Ladenites, she's totally crazy and seems to think that they have all the money and all the power in the world and all the ability to do anything that any one of them ever claimed that they would like to see. So I saw her, you know, I think this was a new statement that Hamas wants to take over the world. The world. Yeah. When they're just the strongest gang in an Israeli prison camp. They're nothing. They're the Crips plus the Bloods, maybe. They're going to take over the world? The world.
The world.
Look, they're not even going to take over Jordan or Egypt or Saudi or Western Iraq or any part of Syria or even any part of Palestine.
Yeah, they're done.
Jack squat ever. Right. They're going to take over the Levant and then the rest of the Middle East and then on to Berlin. Get the hell out of here with this. Yeah. And this is the best one of them. This is the most rational one of them.
What are you going to do now besides continuing to do
another book? Leave me alone. I'm going back to being a radio show host.
You're going back to your show and your own podcast. That's what I was going to ask. Like, are you going to take off until like mid-January now, or are you going to?
Oh no, dude! I got to work. I got to do the audiobook. I've already begun. to do. That's going to be a podcast series at scotthortonshow.com on the Martyr Made model before it's an Audible book, because it's going to be 48 hours long, rough back of the envelope math there. It's going to be
That's
incredible.
a week and a half of work for me, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but in a row of reading out loud, it's going to take a little while to get it produced, the final version. It's going to be, 96 hours of reading for 48 hours of finished product, right? Or worse.
Right.
But I'm going to get that done for you. And then, no, what I really want to do is go back to radio, man. That's what I love, is radio. And
because you do anti-war radio on Pacifica.
That's true. And also the podcast is, counts. But like, look, my real job in the world is reading things and then explaining them to people who don't have time to read things, but are interested, right? Like that. That's my real role, is to be the middleman. Even the book is like that. The book is not full of a bunch of original journalism, unless you count me interviewing experts on my show and reporting what they said there. But like that, not really, the book is full of me synthesizing for you 10,000 things that I figured out. And then, hopefully then you get it in one space where I know that you just don't have the time to put in the effort that I do to put it together for you. So that's really how I see my role. And then also I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, which means I got 20 guys whose careers I have to bolster, right? Like they're all my responsibility to boost their writing and their podcasts and all of their great work. I've got an incredible team of people at the Libertarian Institute. So honestly, like, if I didn't really do anything except try to help them do what they're doing from now on, that would be perfectly fine.
Still a win.
So yeah. So
Rachel was all excited. I told her I was gonna, Rachel Nelson.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Rachel, she and I got to, she posted a few months back, hey, I've started watching MASH again. So then I started watching MASH, and I'm sitting here going, we need to do a libertarian perspective on MASH.
Oh, that'd be dope, man. That'd be dope. Start with the movie, right?
But I told her I've got you scheduled, and she's like, finally a friend's got Scott on. And I'm like, you've got so many friends. What do you mean finally? But yeah, she was all excited that I told her I had you pinned down for today.
Yeah, I have a bunch of notes for a book about Israel-Palestine, but I really don't want to write it. And I don't think I have the stomach for it, man. I just hate the subject too much. And I think I can use probably all that same material in other ways without having
it's a painful, I was a Zionist for, whether I knew it or not, for a long time. And then when I did know it, I still was. It took people like you and others out there for me to go, why does this not set well with me? Why is this not, you heard when I introduced you at the Defend the Guard rally, like how insane I felt because I felt alone. And it was the same thing when I moved out of the Zionist camp and started to realize that Zionism is not the same as Judaism, is not the same as American, America first. And it's so painful to sit back and realize where you were and how, as an individual, you were so willing to justify stuff that you would have declared inhumane anywhere else in the world. And whether your next door neighbor treating their kids poorly, or another country treating their own population that way. And I don't blame you, even having the material, to not want to have to actually put it all together in a book. I look at what Daryl did with Martyr Made and Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem. I don't know how he made it through that. I really don't. That had to have been,
really is great.
And now to go through what he's going through, what they're doing to him for having done that, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't know if it's worth. Yeah. I do have a bit of good news for you. So in the interim from when we first met and then you came on the show, we had Garrett that was hurt really severe out in Virginia with the PTSD related episode. He is back home and making phenomenal progress, walking again, and learning, I think, every single language under the sun. I don't know how that guy's doing it, but pretty much every day on Facebook,
he's all healing up physically, huh?
Yeah, I doubt he's ever going to be 100% of what he was after what he went through. But Bob and Sue were able to get him home, get their home outfitted to be able to get him trained up and physical therapied up. And I wanted to tell you that in person because you really touched my heart when you took up for him when I told you about that, and it meant a ton to Bob and Sue when you took up for him. And so
Bob's a good guy, man. You know, I got to meet him a second time too. I can't remember which event. He's a good dude, and yeah, look, it's really sad. I mean, I'm so grateful to hear the good news, man, that he's doing well. I know that there are so many people like that who came home from the wars and just feel discarded and that nobody cares about them and whatever. And it's a tragedy. It's unforgivable what these guys go through. I know, you know, Fort Hood is a couple 100 miles up the road from here, not quite. And I don't know exactly.
That's half a county in Texas.
They renamed it. It's not Fort Hood anymore. It's Fort Woke or whatever. But they
Fort Bragg will always be Fort Bragg to me, so I know how you feel.
Yeah. I mean, they eat their pistols a lot, and then they ride their crotch rockets into bridge supports at 170 miles an hour, or, you know, whatever kind of suicide by adrenaline.
And we sit back and wonder why.
And it's, you know, the Cost of War Project did a study, and this was a few years ago now. It was 30,000 guys who had been to Iraq or Afghanistan and back who had killed themselves. And there was even a film one time where Ayman al-Zawahiri says, our guys kill themselves out of selflessness fighting for their people. Your guys kill themselves out of despair because you betray them. And it's like, damn, dude. Like, I really resent the fact that was true and that he was the son of a bitch who said it. You know what? Shut him up, man. Somebody shut him up. But that because it was right that, you know, not that his men are honorable, but certainly the contrast with our guys alone in the darkness and nobody helping them and is why they're dying. When after they got home from the fight, are you kidding me? What do you mean they died after they got home? And it's because the government that said that, oh yeah, no, you're the greatest hero. No one can ever question the policy. Otherwise, you're stabbing the heroes in the face. And then the heroes come home and they go, well, you're a hero. Figure it out.
Go take care of yourself. And we're going to continue to give billions to the VA that you'll never see.
Yeah,
Scott, I can't
remember who said to me that, you know, when we idolize people, we also dehumanize them. Right. It's the same thing as calling them the N-word, is calling them a hero. Because now you've taken them out of the realm of just being Jimmy, the guy who has problems like everybody else. Jimmy, who actually went through hell and back. And you
might got to deal with it on his own.
For, you know?
Yeah.
So
I cannot thank you enough for taking on the project and then making the time on a day where you could have, I don't know, are you going to go bass fishing or are you just going to ride around?
No, I never have time to fish, man. You got to like have some tall boys on a weekend for that. I just usually just drive around and, you know, on Lake Austin, you could take Bull Creek up and there's a great barbecue place. You park in the back.
I know you and Woods talked about it. And I'm like,
much fun. Yeah, I like to do that. It's a little late in the day now and it's going to be pretty cool this evening. So I'm not sure if I'm going today. Probably,
you know, pretty soon. Cool. I'm like, I'm not feeling any sympathy for you, bro. Like it was 2
Come
degrees.
Visit me, man. I'll take you out in the 40s.
I will. You let me know.
I'll take you out in the 40s. That doesn't go for anybody else, but you I'll take out.
I appreciate that. You know what? I might take you up on that because my old ass is about done with Minnesota winters.
I feel you, man. Come on down to Texas, dude. We got room for you.
Well, thanks for the invite. You go get on your boat for a little bit if you can, and I will link you. I'll send this to Connor when it's ready to go up, and I will tag you on. I know you prefer to use Twitter X. I call it Twix now. So I prefer to use Twix. I prefer to use Twix. When it goes up, I'll tag you in that. So I thank you for your time. And where can everybody order your book on your way out?
Oh yeah, here you go. It's Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Brand new by the Libertarian Institute. You can find it at libertarianinstitute.org and at scotthorton.org. and it'll just forward you on to Amazon there. Although if you click the link at scotthorton.org, I get an extra little kickback there.
So we will send everybody to the scotthorton.org one.
There you go. And then the Kindle is there, but you'll have to search it separate under the Kindle category because it got unlinked because I had to make a slight change and it unlinked them. I got to fix that. But there is a Kindle version if you search on Amazon there. And then also, as I said, if you want to, I have all the footnotes in the book, but if you want the hot links so you can click them and follow, then you can pull up scotthorton.org/provoked/notes and follow along there. And then you'll have the links to all the sources if you want to double check and see if what they claim is true.
Well, I appreciate your time, and we will send everybody to the links because I have people who listen to my stuff and they go, I want to see the proof. And I'm like, trust me, Scott provides it. So thank you for your time, brother.
Absolutely.
Get out of here and go have a good afternoon.
Have a good one.
Take care. If you guys do not listen to his shows through the Libertarian Institute and Scott Horton Show, I don't know what you're doing with your time. The amount of people that Scott talks to, the depth of what he talks about will be mind changing for you, world changing for you. Like I said, the first time that I met Scott, I thought I was going insane because I'm seeing things and thinking things and hearing things that aren't making sense. And I'm trying to register where the cognitive dissonance was coming from, why it was bothering me so much. And then I literally stumbled across to Scott. I don't even remember how. But I'm going, this is why. The things that he's saying, the people that he's talking to, these are the people that are making sense of what I'm struggling with. And I promise you, that's exactly what will happen for you if you would just take the time to get outside of your comfort zones, outside of your echo chambers, and listen to what he has to say and the receipts that he brings to prove it. We mentioned Daryl Cooper from Martyr Mate, and it's the same thing. I had a friend who I plugged into Scott, and he came back and he's like, dude, mind blowing. And I plugged him into Martyr Made, especially Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, and complete 180. 180 on the issue of October 7th and whatnot. It was that profound for him. And that's what I want people to understand. We've been living in echo chambers, and we've been living in a world devoid of truth media for a very long time. And I know that for the people who consider themselves MAGA or consider themselves Republican or consider themselves conservative, you think that you listening to certain people out there, and I'm not going to name any names unless I needlessly offend someone at this particular juncture. You think you're listening to these people that are telling you the truth, and they might be telling you more truth than the mainstream media does, whether it be Fox or MSNBC or CNN or whatever else it might be. But when you get away from the approved conservative talking heads and actually get into people who philosophically think through these things, the Scott Hortons, the Dave Smiths, the Tom Woods, Brian McClanahan, Monica Perez, and I could keep going on and on and on. It will help you. It will help you in having your mind changed in a positive way. You will be helped in being able to steelman your opponent's arguments, even if you disagree with the libertarian philosophy, the Rothbardian way of thinking, the Ludwig von Mises way of thinking. It will help you at the very least. More than likely, it's going to improve your thought process. It will make you a better person. So make sure you check out all of Scott's links down below. And one more time before I go, if you guys are able to help Mrs. TC in recouping some of the costs of her missing work and medical bills, we would be grateful. Mrs. Minnesota is my rock. I am only able to do what I continue to do because she is able to be supportive. And now I want to support her. And if you guys have it in any way, shape, or form, even at this rough time, especially over the holiday seasons, for a lot of us, it's things are tight and difficult. But even just a little bit, the link to Mrs. TC's GiveSendGo is there, and we would be eternally grateful. So, as my friend Monica made for me, she loves my tagline. So, until next time, my friends, fight for your liberty. It is yours. Fight for your freedom. It belongs to you. And Sic Semper, Tyrannus.
We are go for liftoff in T-30. Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.